Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to another episode of Voices for Excellence. I am your host, Dr. Michael Connor, CEO and founder of the Agile Evolutionary Group, and of course, the proud host of VFE. And today's guest is a guest that I admire the work that he is doing, as well as the company that he is with, because first of all, and Stewart and I had many of discussions about this, that we really have to now start thinking about the transition or the strategic shift of this 20th century, 21st century model to be 22nd century aligned for generation alpha and beta. And Code for Kids, where Stewart Brown is the director of partnerships for, we had this compelling conversation. I believe it was roughly over an hour. We were talking at AASA with regards to the needs or the generational needs and alignments that our students today, Generation Alpha and Beta, to actual pedagogies, products, solutions that are in alignment to their generational learning demands. And of course, ensuring that we are essentially get into that zone of proximal development. And I always say this, and Stewart laughs and everybody laughs when I say this. I said that within the next 5 to 8 years, I'm going to think of coding as cursive to us when we were growing up, but coding is going to be an essential skill, competency that students are going to need in this 22nd century demand to have that equilibrium with artificial intelligence and the advancements of the disruptive technologies that we're engaging in. But I am so happy to bring my friend Stewart Brown. He is a multiple founder, has started companies, but currently he is the director of partnership for Code for Kids, a program, a solution that I am absolutely in love with. And that's why I have Stewart here to be able to unpack that. So now we start looking at the symbiotic relationships of solutions that are going to develop our students in this 22nd century economic demand. Mr. Stewart Brown, welcome to Voices for Excellence. How you doing, my friend?
Thank you, Michael. I am doing fantastic. Great to be here. I know we've been meaning to get this on the calendar for a while now, so I'm glad we could make it happen.
Yeah, of course. And you know what, Stuart? I'm glad what the saying is what, better late than never, right? And because even though we've been planning this, listen to my audience, Mr. Stewart Brown is harder to get in touch with the prime minister, the head of the ministries, the president. So finally we were able to put a date and a time to get this recorded because I think it's so important. It's a critical imperative that we be able to talk about what these 22nd century pedagogies, solutions, competencies that students are going to need moving forward in what I call this AC 2030 state. And Stuart, like I said, our conversation that we had is so profound that I want to be able to bring Code for Kids and introduce my audience to the work that you're underscoring within your company and what you're doing individually as well to advance 22nd century demands and indicators. But Stuart, before we get to the actual podcast, I'm going to ask a fun question. Okay. You have been a founder of two, not one, but two successful international EdTech companies. Currently, the director of partnership at Code for Kids, and of course, one of the trusted voices in AI. Thank you for supporting AI Literacy Day that just happened last month. But for those that don't know you, Stuart, what song describes your leadership impact in the AC stage of education, which means after COVID-19?
Yeah, really good question. I'm going to say a song that is not necessarily my go-to or favorite song to listen to, but I think it's very testing of the times we're in education, and that's A Sky Full of Stars by Coldplay. I think this moment right now in education that we're in is it can feel so heavy at times, because so much is changing and so quickly, quicker than we've ever experienced before. And a lot of the times we can kind of forget to give ourselves some grace and realize just because it's really heavy and really challenging, that there's not a lot of opportunity and possibility that comes with it. And there's a huge amount of possibility that comes with it. And so, A Sky Full of Stars is really about that. It's, the opportunities are endless. A lot of my work is helping people in the education sector not focus on, what's AI might be exposing in education alone, but also maybe what it's exposing, but what that could lead us towards, what direction it leads us to, what, ultimately is the future state of education that is going to be so much more impactful and powerful and relevant to students. And I know we spoke a lot about that relevancy in at AASA. And so, that's kind of why that song really stands out for me at this time. I'm really trying to help those in education see that if we revisit, relook, rethink the foundations that we're laying in school and how we're preparing educators, how we're, rallying the metrics and outcomes we're looking for around that, and how we preparing students for this future 2030 and beyond state of the world that they're going to be graduating to. um, there's a lot of possibility, a lot of opportunities, and I think we need to remind ourselves of that and look at it from an optimistic lens.
Yeah. And Stuart, I appreciate the three words, the three R's now. I'm going to categorize them as is revisit, relook, and rethink. Right. And when we think about what this future of education, the education vector looks like, we already know that there's inherited paradoxes that are embedded in that. But we, as a collection of educators, have to revisit, relook, and rethink what those metrics are, what those outcomes are. You highlighted a critical year. I think this is, I always say that this is the essential linchpin of when we start seeing that transition really, which is 2030. Just to give you a statistic, and again, this is just off of rote memorization, that our kindergartners today are going to be matriculating out of, I believe they're going to be retiring at like 2082. Now, think about what the world is going to be like at that time, where AI is not going to be a separate silo. And within a conversation, it's just going to be ubiquitously embedded into the conversation and be a part of the thread that is going to be everyday life. Just like when we talk about arrival AI, which the example is electricity that Aaron had gave previously here. It's the same thing that AI is going to be in education. But you're right. We got to give people grace, and there's got to be that, and there's great opportunity right now, as I say, in the 22nd century. Because Stuart, you and I had this conversation. My audience had heard me say this. If we continue to level set and to concretize 21st century mindset, underscoring 21st century practices, then we're exacerbating gaps for generation alpha and beta. But I have this personal affinity, Stuart, for Code for Kids. I mean, I usually am not so overtly biased about anything, but I'm very biased about Code for Kids because it is, to my audience, it's a computer science curriculum that has lessons with coding, robotics, digital literacy, STEAM. Stewart will be able to go on the diatribe to that started that laundry list that I just highlighted. But again, Stuart, I want to go back to this, and everywhere I state, or everywhere I go, I state this, is that coding is an essential skill that every single kid need to have. Now, we're talking about vibe coding. I'm talking about rudimentary levels of coding. But before we get into the alignment, right, with these 22nd century educators, because Stuart, what you guys are doing at Code for Kids and what you're doing is phenomenal, right? What was the genesis of the launch in 2018? This was in the BC stage of education before COVID-19, where AI and coding was like, you're not cool. You're an outlier. You're an anomaly. So this was 2018. And then also, Stuart, within your critical role, how are you framing the discussions domestically and internationally with this strategic urgency around curriculum and how it must be multidisciplinary and embeds computer science competencies to prepare generational learners for 2030 and the 22nd century and beyond?
The world is very different in 2018, and it's crazy that that I'm saying that it was only 8 years ago. But so much has happened really because of the advances of technology. But the genesis wasn't too different to what we are doing today, and the narrative and the discussions we're having. It was really about the fact that we weren't necessarily trying to turn every kid into a coder. We weren't trying to just strengthen the pipeline into software engineering jobs or anything like that. It was more about the realization that students were growing up surrounded by incredibly powerful technology, and the technology at that time was advancing and evolving very quickly too. It's now just skyrocketed in the age of AI. But even though they were growing up surrounded by technology and they were using technology every day in and outside of school, they were not necessarily being helped to understand it. And we wanted to change that. They may have been a computer lab in a school, but, maybe they were taught, typing skills. Maybe they were taught, mouse skills, how to Google something. It was very, very rudimentary. And we wanted to go level deeper to help every kid understand what is under the hood of these very powerful systems. And to do that, you then, when you learn how to code, you learn how algorithms work, you learn how patterns work. And suddenly it becomes something that doesn't necessarily need to be this isolated subject, but this connective tissue across the core curriculum. So, we have math teachers teaching a lot of our pattern recognition lessons in math. We've designed our whole curriculum to be cross-curricular. So kids could do their first website ever and do text-based coding in fifth or sixth grade, but it's actually a social studies lesson. And what we've seen is that over the years, as we focus more and more on literacy scores, math scores, all the stuff that is seemingly going down that everyone's very worried and concerned about, we've seen this increasing shift where the silos are getting greater across subjects. And suddenly, the purpose of a math lesson is fully on math sometimes, and the purpose of a history lesson is fully on history, but there's so much connective relevance across the core curriculum. There's art in science, there's science in art, and computer science. It's this like underlying connective tissue ultimately that helps to bring it all together. And it's not just one extra thing. It's something that really strengthens the understanding of how technology works, which I think is ultimately the roadmap to instilling agency in our kids for the modern world. And then at the same time, it's reinforcing and supporting the core curriculum. So it's not competing with it, which I think a lot of the time, those silos, to the second part of your question, those silos and the curriculums that are lack that cross-curricular integration. I think that's often times where we're always trying to jam one extra thing in, and they end up competing with one another. And that's not, at the end of the day, it's not about one subject's more important than the other. It's about what is the world the students are growing up into? What are they going to be graduating into? What world are they going to be tasked with leading and shaping? And how are we preparing them across the school day and across the instructional day, across all subjects, to have the skills and understanding and preparation to be able to step into that moment and do the most with that.
Yeah, Stuart, great point, because I think that that has to be this hybrid of a catalytic and essential question for every single educator within the ecosystem. How are we preparing students for their world? How are we preparing students for a future economic demand through our curriculum frameworks, through our strategic plans, through our instructional frameworks? Because you're absolutely right. If you ask 99% of educators, and I'll go out and say that 99% of educators, we're preparing our students for a world of yesterday. And it's not because of collective discussions, theories, practices that we're trying to put in place, is because we need to address the standardized industrial model and the integrated archaic structures and systems that are in place. You stated it. How are we preparing them for their world tomorrow? And what does that look like within the academic day? That's where you see the multidisciplinary curriculum that integrates computer science and those key competencies and skills around coding, the arts, technology. Like you said, in 18, it was technology. 2026 is technology and AI with that. But now, Stuart, and this is kind of a sub question, right? Leading and unpacking the actual Code for Kids curriculum. What does that look like? And specifically, as you stated, we have to prepare students for their world tomorrow, an economic demand that we cannot see right now, but know that these essential skills, competencies are going to have a direct impact within influence in their lives. What does a code for kids curriculum look like? You talked about the strategic integration, you said social studies and math as an example, but can you unpack that further?
Yeah, absolutely. So Code for Kids is specifically K-8 focused. We're focused on building this foundational understanding before kids enter high school in knowing what's under the hood of AI and what's under the hood of technology. And so we don't want kids landing on social media and being effective and shaped and influenced by these powerful algorithms that they don't understand or are, you know, in often times they're blind to. And so we want to instill them with that foundational understanding. And so we, we incorporate everything from coding to machine learning and AI literacy. We do a lot of, our full K-2 curriculum. It's all focused. Majority of it is unplugged. It's all focused on.
Stuart, and I just want to interject because I normally don't interject, but on key points, K through 2, you see a lot of programs, strategies when it comes to developing these skills 6 through 12. You're an outlier. You said K through 2, building these skills at the essential foundational level. Why K through 2? I know that this is kind of like a really easy question, but we don't see computer science, we don't see machine learning, AI literacy at the kindergarten level. Can you just expand why?
Absolutely. So just for clarity, it's a K-8 program, but we're starting in K-2. We not necessarily diving into the heavy layered details of machine learning in that grade, but there's underlying foundations that help a kid when they see coding in maybe third or fourth grade, when they start on block-based coding or start learning about machine learning, they when they have those foundations where they learn about, an algorithm is ultimately following step-by-step instructions. It's guided and directed by a human being. It's not that much different to following a instruction on how to put a desk together from IKEA. It's not that different from following a recipe in a recipe book. And we try to link it to things that are so relevant to the systems and the everyday aspects in life around them. And then we help the kids to understand that there's patterns everywhere in the world. There's systems everywhere in the world. And a lot of the time, we're unaware of it. And we want to wake them up to the fact that these are the systems at play, and these are the systems that are underlying the more detailed coding, machine learning, etc. That happens later on. And I think just to that point, the reason why we focus on those foundational years is that it gets increasingly harder to learn this stuff if you're in sixth, seventh, eighth grade, or even in high school and you're seeing it for the first time. And we see that. We see schools that struggle with it. We see schools, we could work with two different schools. In one school, you might have like a seventh grader who's learning foundational block-based coding for the first time. We might have a third grader doing the exact same lessons at another school, but they have had K-2 foundations. And sometimes the third grader might even be more proficient than the seventh grader. And I'm not even lying there. And that's why these foundations are so important. And so a lot of the time we're looking at AI literacy now, we're looking at digital literacy, we're looking at computer science courses. A lot of that is happening, a lot of the work is happening in high school, and it's almost too late. It's it's almost like it's this reactive way to figure out, okay, how can we put the band-aid on this problem? But we need to do something with those kids because they didn't have those foundations. So yes, but we have to start earlier. And otherwise we're going to just keep repeating this pattern of kids entering high school being dominated by these powerful systems that we as adults are still trying to understand ourselves. And there's a better way to do this. So that's the foundational piece. The other piece is, we're teaching the kids the basics of cybersecurity, data analysis, pattern recognition, robotics. There's a lot of coding, like I said, and everything like this it's all cross-curricular and then a lot of real-world relevance. So there's no gamified learning in our platform. We're very anti that. We're not trying to keep kids on the platform and engaged, and we don't, measure the metrics that we look at are not how long have kids been engaged on our platform or how many lessons have they completed, but we're actually measuring what are the learning outcomes they're gaining. So we built in benchmark assessments to track, where do the kids come in at the beginning of the year? Do they have prior exposure? Do they actually understand does an eighth grader understand what an algorithm really is? And a lot of the time, schools don't know this stuff. So we help surface that, and then we provide benchmark assessments throughout the year, and that helps to kind of connect it together and make sure that we're tracking growth and proficiency and understanding as the kids get ready to get into high school.
Phenomenal. Stewart, and thank you for elaborating on that because the rationale I asked that question and to my audience, when we think about global competitiveness, right? And that's where we're at right now in the AC stage of education. We're not competing against each other internally, domestically here, but we have to think about it from a global standpoint. And the countries in the GCC, India, China, the UAE through their country plan, We the UAE 2030, and Saudi Arabia through their country's plan, Vision 2031, they start AI and technology instruction at kindergarten. There's a designated amount of hours per week dedicated to AI integrated instruction starting at kindergarten. Right now, here in the United States, to my audience, Aaron and people at the United States Department of Education have already started that conversation about what does the guidelines look like for now bringing AI literacy and these competencies within the PK-12 vertical. So when we think about what Code for Kids are doing, specifically at the outset in 2018, they started thinking about this way before where we're at right now, where we're seeing other countries that are lamenting policies around AI instruction starting at kindergarten. And it starts with those foundational components. And you're absolutely right, Stewart. It was very intentional and strategic on what you guys did at Code for Kids. But when you think about coding, machine learning, AI and digital literacy, cybersecurity, coding, robotics, data patterns, these are all future focused skills and competencies that kids are going to be engaging with this on an everyday basis. So, Stuart, when I think about your work, when I think about what Code for Kids is doing, you are already, or you have positioned yourself pretty much to be on the frontier regarding these shifts, these pedagogical system shifts in education. But how do we shift instruction? You started to talk about it, but I want you to go deeper with this. How do you shift instruction and curriculum mandates to prepare Generation Alpha and Beta for 2030 and beyond?
Very good question. And I'm going to start by saying it is not that simple. And I think this is again, to that first question, we got to give ourselves some grace and just take a moment to breathe and realize this is a work in progress. This is the marathon. This is not a sprint. There's some low-hanging fruits for sure, but we're not going to turn around this tomorrow. And I think, from a systems perspective, the question is, what do we measure as success in the educational day? Are those grades that we measure, the literacy the scores, the graduation rates, all of those things. What are we measuring for? And then whatever we're measuring for, we naturally optimize for in the school day. And and I think what that does is sometimes it leads to mandates coming out that are not necessarily in the best interest of learning. In our work at Code for Kids, there's been an increase of computer science mandates coming out. Um, we're now Mississippi is the 13th state that just last week announced it's got a computer science and AI mandate coming out that every kid needs to learn computer science before they graduate high school. Now, those mandates are great, but sometimes when you mandate it, they don't think it through very well. A lot of the times in reality, it's a teacher that not is not necessarily a computer science teacher then has to teach it. It's almost treated as this like compulsory subject or course that students have to do, and so they walk into that as something that they have to do. It's compulsory and not something they want to do. And this again takes me back into the foundations. So, working with this one school district in Louisiana, and I mention them because they have been so phenomenal to work with. They've got a mandate too that they need every kid to graduate high school completing a computer science course. And they came to us because the CTE director there realized the importance of vertical alignment in the younger grades. And he wanted the kids to enter into ninth grade and have this compulsory computer science course and actually want to do it rather than being forced to do it. And they have to do it. Don't get me wrong. But he wanted to, really plant that exposure from a younger age. And then I think, we need to look at PD for the teachers around this. We need to look at the training that the teachers get before they even enter the profession. And we need to zoom out and look at just a lot of the time we throw additional compliance and mandates on, and we don't take a moment to take a beat and actually zoom out and say, wait, but what is the domino effect here? What is adding this mandate going to do? Because we hear it all the time. The teachers say this is just one extra thing they have to do. And then they ask themselves, why did I get into this profession in the first place? They wanted to help kids learn. They wanted to facilitate learning and see kids grow and thrive and develop. And their job has become sometimes 70, 80% of the time just making sure that they can check this box and then try squeeze in some like real facilitative Socratic learning. Um, and that's ultimately what we need to make sure that we have room for. And if there's too many mandates, we don't have room for that. And so it's not to say mandates are bad. It's to say let's look at it from a big picture and let's look at what are the outcomes we want. Work backwards from there. We always say at Code for Kids, let's begin with the end in mind. And that's how we have to do it. And I think a lot of the times we're very reactive. Not to go off topic too much, but I'm sure you've seen like the big debate right now over like first it was the anxious generation and the cell phone bans and social media, and now it's the digital delusion book, and how it's like I think we're in this place where that we haven't given the leaders of today any foundational understanding of how technology actually works. But we're asking them to make the very intense, important decisions about what technology's role is in the classroom. And no one wants to harm kids, but they're not approaching it from an informed perspective. So let's change it for the future generations. Let's make sure that they understand how technology works so that when it comes into figuring out what role the 2030, 2040 version of AI is and what role it has in the classroom, they can approach it from a very informed perspective with that foundational understanding.
So well put, eloquently stated. 2040, Stewart, man, we're going to be talking about agentic AI 5.0.
Oh man. Well, that's that, my son's in kindergarten now. Your kid's what, in first grade?
No, no, he's in fifth grade now.
Fifth grade.
Just turned 11 now. Stuart, we're going to be, and here's the thing, right? We're going to be living vicariously through this, through our own kids. These active transitions that we're going to see, in education over time. Stuart, you highlighted four critical points, and when I think about and I'm glad you brought that up, and to my audience, specifically district and school leaders, I challenge you not to have your coding courses as electives. Now, that's going to present some controversy, Stuart, when we think about, that's going on an outlier sense. But when we think about, intentional design, designing for our kids in mind, kind of like that design thinking, empathy. And when we look at their needs, their skills matrix or the skills matrix, I always unpack in the skills and competencies that they're going to need, Stuart. Coding is going to be a part of it. Under AI literacy or understanding diverse intelligence systems is going to be a part of it. So that's why I always say that now coding and those type of courses need to be embedded in the core academic program, and because it's going to be an essential thread with anything that they're going to do. Education Moore's law we talked about, human intelligence, or I like to say humans and machines, working in this equilibrium. Same thing in education, human intelligence of how students are going to be using AI in their natural world, and even in education that we got to emulate that. But you talked about vertical alignment, which is so essential. Professional learning and having that with this reciprocity with AI literacy. You talked about it. Our students and adults need to have core literacy foundations to integrate, discern, and as well as identify specific intelligence systems that's going to be a part of this strategy. You talked about it going out broadly. What can we eliminate or what can be de emphasized to now create that domino, as you talked about, coherence to my educators that are out there? Stuart, you're putting it in a context where they can understand you and not understand me. But I love the design aspect, reverse engineering. Can you see? Normally, Stuart, I'm not biased about a lot of things. I try to be very objective, but when you unpack code for kids for me, I'm like, I love it. I love it. I was like, if I was still in my executive role, we went K through 12 and create a vertical articulation within that. But what I love about this too, Stuart, is that you formed a partnership with the Economist Education Foundation, and you created a course called Fake News and AI. I want you to unpack that for me because, I want you to couple it and decouple. What are the activities that are embedded in it? But more importantly, why is it a strategic imperative to develop student literacy skills with evaluating media and AI content with this critical lens that you talked about? And then what do these skills look like in action with students analyzing media and AI content ethically? So, like when you see your kindergarten son or my fifth grade son doing that, how do we know that those strategies are in application and action?
I think I'll start by saying media literacy and AI literacy I see as it's so correlative that, because a lot of the time, so much of AI literacy is looking at information that is written really well and sounds very confident, but is not necessarily always true. And so, you know, we we realized as adults, but also children, that we were being dominated by information coming at us from every direction. And it was making us feel different things and adding to that mental health burden. But it was also, we realized that kids needed this critical skill to analyze the information in front of them and know how to dissect it, how to break it apart, and ask the important questions to know, is this from a trusted source? Is this not? And how do I figure out that? Which steps do I take? And everything that we do, just to this other point, is there's so many durable skills that we teach through computer science and AI literacy at Code for Kids, where like we are always making sure that we're teaching kids how do they unpack uncertain, complex problems and debug them ultimately. And so that's what we did. We've got similar lessons where we talk about the fact that every person, as soon as you get on the internet and create a profile with an app, you've now got a digital identity and what that means and how it follows you for the rest of your life. And so we're not trying to scare kids about what the dangers are, because I think a lot of what's out there is like that. We're trying to get them to understand this is what's happening under the hood of all these things that you encounter on a daily basis. So this is how you can approach it from a very informed perspective. And again, it comes down to giving them agency and judgment in that world of uncertainty where everything is coming at you really quickly and you can't really tell what is true, what is not, and how to dissect that.
Amazing, because Stuart, I was just as you were providing your answer, I was crosswalking with different frames and indicators of my 22nd century education model, specifically the learner domain. And it touched upon six different indicators. And when I think about that, those six different indicators fits under this auspice of readiness. And I think that we need to take much more of a direct position on how we level set readiness and literacy simultaneously. And I think that you guys are doing that, at Code for Kids, because that skill set right there, Stuart, and don't laugh at me when I tell you this, okay? And when it first came out, a friend sent me a video, and I forgot who it was Tom Cruise and somebody, I can't remember, you probably seen it, and they were fighting each other, and I'm like, "Oh, is this the new Mission Impossible, 4 or 5 that's coming out or something?" Wow, I wouldn't see those 2 of a dynamics, in a movie. It was AI generated, but Stuart, you couldn't tell the difference. So, just imagine the level of advancement, the sophistication that these engines and models are gonna have, agentic and machine learning, supervised algorithms that are going to be playing into these models, where now the rapidity of growth is going to essentially have something like a Tom Cruise fighting Michael Connor, and everybody's like, why are you fighting Tom Cruise? But just those, and again, that's a skill set and competencies that students are going to be able or going to have to master as we continue to move forward. But there's this great novelty, Stuart, with integrating disruptive technologies into the education model. When I start thinking about preparing students, for this AC 2030 paradigm, when I start thinking about, redesigning and reimagining what the new model looks like for what I'm calling the intelligent model within the 22nd century. But when we think about that, there's this great variability with capacity and implementation. Rightfully so. We're at this really baseline level. And there's that tension to try to achieve coherence, with education leaders and ed tech companies and companies like Code for Kids to unpack this around this modernization of the model. But from your international and domestic experience, what approaches are being underscored to achieve this level of coherence and innovation within the instructional model? But more importantly, Stuart, how do we achieve sustainability during this time of uncertainty?
Yeah, yeah. So the way we approach it at Code for Kids is we know that every state, every district, sometimes this very schools with inside a district are incredibly unique, and there's local context that is not necessarily the same as the district next door. So we have a very customized implementation approach to districts. It's very consultative at the beginning, understanding what is the current state. Sometimes it's, we might be surveying the teachers, the students, is this something new? Are teachers terrified about the subject more so than the students? And oftentimes that is the case. And then we look at, we're not trying to solve the all the problems or get to this very end goal in year one because it's unrealistic. We could try, but we're gonna, get it. We're gonna frustrate a lot of people in the process and probably be counterproductive. We look to work towards a 3 to 5 year plan, and it's what is the state right now? Where do we want to get to? We want to get there as quickly as possible, but also as practically as possible. And so that might we'll look at what is available in the instructional day. Is this something that in year one maybe it makes sense to you know introduce on elective basis or on a specials basis where the kids rotate through an isolated subject that is taught within, STEM or technology or something like that. Then we look to work towards this kind of cross-curricular, integrated, embedded approach. That's often a little bit more complex and it takes time. We might have a technology teacher or a computer science teacher teaching this once a week, but then we'll work with that technology teacher to bring a group of the core instructional teachers together and say, okay, you're teaching about the solar system in science this upcoming quarter. You're teaching about this in history. You're teaching about this in art. Bring in these subjects, these lessons. We've done some of it with students. The students like it. They really like getting really creative and doing digital art. So maybe swap out one of your lessons and have them do this, and they'll also be learning computer science at the same time. You know, build an app about the solar system rather than just, doing it off the screen. But it's very intentional. It's not trying to just throw computer science in where it doesn't have a place. Where it integrates well, that's where we recommend it. And we do it on a very fluid basis.
I love what you stated, right? Because everything in Stewart, to my audience, Stewart knows how I think. Stewart's been around me. This is not his first encounter. So he knows how theoretical my mind operates. Stewart, you just highlighted Peter Senge's work within the fifth dimension, current state, desired outcomes, right? Where are we at? Where is this diagnostic lens of where are we at now? And how do we move strategically in this phased manner to get to our desired outcomes? To my audience, Stewart said this is a 3 to 5 year process. I would even go now with the raptivity and the evolution of AI. And because there's these foundational bases of AI literacy across, whether it be from the stakeholder standpoint, families and students, that might take a little longer. But Stewart, the way you contextualized it, I always reference back to this work around systems integration with AI, a large body of work scaled into parts and prototype for change over time. Your approach, to my audience, Code for Kids, Stewart's approach is dismantling or deconstructing silos, that now there's that level of interdependent collaboration to be able to create these multidisciplinary experiences. Stewart, all I just got to do is this.
Well, well said. Well said. It said it better than I could.
Well, listen, if they rather hear it from you because it's much easier to understand. But Stewart, my brother, this is the last question now. I don't know if I can hold you to this. I've been saying this for 4 years now on the podcast, but I try to hold my guests to 3 words. It normally doesn't happen. And when they are rule followers, I say, please expand because they're so good. But Stewart, for our last question, what 3 words do you want our audience today to leave with regarding artificial intelligence, coding skills, and a future focused model to level set what I'm calling the 22nd century or 22nd century AI centric learning ecosystem in the AC stage of education?
These are my 3 words. I'm going to keep it there. I'm going to try agency, understanding, direction.
All right, I'm telling you to break the rules.
I will elaborate. So agency, because students need to feel that they can shape the world and not just consume it. They need to see themselves as active participants in this AI world that they're going to be graduating into. And I think right now, without this education, without this understanding, they're going to be passive consumers and users of these tools, but not the drivers. And we want them to be drivers. And, that's where the end goal is instilling agency in them. From understanding, I think the surface level exposure, it's just not enough anymore. I think you'll see AI literacy written everywhere by so many providers and vendors. And when you go into it, you often see that this is very much like it's just too surface level. We need kids to really understand have the foundational understandings of these tools, because the tools are going to continue changing, the system's going to continue evolving. But if we equip them with the foundations, they will be able to adapt and still understand the version of AI that we might see in 10, 15 years from today, which is going to be very different. We don't want them to, be experts at like Python and JavaScript in terms of coding, but we want them to understand coding as a language, as something that they've learned, and not be, language experts.
Stuart, can you say that one more time for my audience so they don't have to rewind it? Coding becomes a what?
No, what I was saying was we don't want the kids to be experts in any tools or any coding languages. We want them to understand the foundations behind these coding languages.
Absolutely.
And that's why we don't have a Python course, we don't have a JavaScript course, we don't have an HTML course. So we want them to know a little bit of every coding language, but what they're going to see in maybe 10, 15 years from now are going to be very different languages. And the foundations are what are going to give them the agility to adapt and still stay relevant as the world around them evolves.
Absolutely. So, Stuart, agency, understanding, and direction. Triangulate that. I think we're going to be moving a whole lot of kids in Generation Alpha, Beta, my son, your kids, your son. We will be preparing them well. Stuart, thank you for coming on Voices for Excellence. Just a great host. Like I said, I am completely subjectively biased about what you guys are doing over there. I told you when we met, to my audience, when we met in person at AASA, it was supposed to be a 15-minute coffee. It wound up being like an hour and a half discussion of just kind of geeking out. But Stuart, if any of my audience members want to get in contact with you, learn more about Code for Kids, how they can have Code for Kids be a part of their learning organization, districts, or even schools, how would they be in touch or how would they be able to get in contact with you?
Yeah. So my email is Stewart, Stewart at c4k.io. So that's C, the letter C, the number 4, and the letter K. And then our website is c4k.io. And LinkedIn is also another place I'm posting there all the time. So feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn too.
Yes, and to my audience, I'm not a salesperson for Code for Kids, but I'm a big advocate for the work that they are doing. Please, please, please get in contact with Stewart or any member of Stewart's team at Code for Kids. You will be greatly not surprised, but you will be greatly happy to want to investigate this because it is up and down the line to the 22nd century education model. Stewart Brown, again, thank you for coming on Voices for Excellence. I know that we're going to be talking, communicating, moving forward with this work. We got to do this. So thanks, my friend, for coming on.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. And on that note, onward and upward. Have a great day.